Hello again and welcome to the Morning and Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, we are going to be doing a quick tip tactica for everyone's favourite flame tank, the Hellhound. This iconic tank has been part of the Guard motor pool for literally decades. It was one of the first tanks that we were able to take in our armies, and it is truly beloved by the Guard community. But despite how epic and awesome these guys are, many Guard players have become frustrated with the Hellhound because it can be a bit of a struggle making it work on the battlefield. Like the Leman Russ, the Hellhound is an armoured support vehicle, and it's really there to provide extra firepower to your foot-slogging infantry. But unlike the Leman Russ, its short range and relatively low durability means that sometimes it struggles to stay in the fight long enough to earn its points back and really have a major impact on the game. But do not worry, fellow conscripts, for I am here to help. In today's episode, I will be going through a summary of the Hellhound, pointing out some common mistakes that players often make with it so you can try and avoid making the same mistakes, and then give you a guide on the best way of using this vehicle in your games and how to really get the most out of it. And so without further ado, let's unleash the dogs of war and dive straight into this. First up, let's take a look at this bad boy's stats and battlefield role. So it's a fast attack choice in your codex, and it has a movement of 12, weapon skill 6 plus, ballistic skill 4 plus, strength 6, toughness 7, 11 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7, a 3 plus save. Each Hellhound comes equipped with an Inferno cannon and a heavy flamer, and you can swap the Inferno cannon out for a chem cannon or a melter cannon, and you can swap out the heavy flamer for a heavy bolter or multi-melter. In addition to its two main armaments, you can also give it a dozer blade, a hunter killer missile, or armored tracks. The Inferno cannon has an 18-inch range. It's heavy 2d6, strength 6, AP -2, damage 1. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, that attack automatically hits the target. Technically, it has turret weapon, which gives it +1 to hit, but because it auto hits, the turret weapon rule really doesn't help with this weapon. You've then got the chem cannon, which is a bit shorter range. It's only a range of 12 inches. It's got less shots with heavy D3 plus 3. It's strength 2, AP -3 and 2 damage. But each time an attack is made as a weapon, that attack automatically hits the target. And if it's not a vehicle or titanic unit, an unmodified wound roll of a 2 plus is always successful. So don't be fooled by that strength 2. Against any infantry or monsters that you shoot this thing at, it's actually going to be wounding them on a 2 plus, which is very tasty. You then have the Melter Cannon. This has got a 24-inch range, so it's the longest range of all the turrets we've looked at so far, but it's got the least shots. It's only heavy D3. It's strength 9, AP -4, D6 plus 2 damage. It is blast. It also has turret weapon, and this is the only main weapon that actually benefits from turret weapon because it does actually have to roll to hit. There's no auto hitting with the Melter Cannon. Each time an attack is made with this weapon that targets a unit within half range, the attack has a damage characteristic of D6 plus 4. So if you're shooting at 13 to 24 inch range, D6 plus 2 damage. If you're shooting at 1 to 12 inch range, you actually get D6 plus 4, which gives it an average damage of 7 to 8 for each successful wound that you get through, which is pretty tasty. And whichever turret weapon you want to give it is going to be up to you. If you want it to hunt down marine infantry dug into cover, go for that chem cannon. You want to be hunting after tanks and Imperial Knights, go for the Melter Cannon. Not sure what you're going to be taking on? The Inferno Cannon is a great take-all-comers option. Really, you have to decide what role you want this bad boy to perform on the battlefield and what target you want him to go after. And depending on what weapon you stick on top is going to influence the weapon you're going to stick in the front. So if it's going to be going after infantry or you're not sure, you want a take all comers option, I would definitely go for that heavy flamer. And if you think you're going to be going after enemy tanks with it and you've put the Melter Cannon on it, then you might as well give it a multi-melter in the front as well. I would pretty much always avoid the heavy bolter. It's not really going to complement any of the turret weapons that you're going to be going for. Likewise, I wouldn't really bother with any of the optional upgrades like the Dozer Blade, Hunter Killer Missile, or Armor Tracks. If any of them end up being free via various points changes and FAQs and updates, then by all means, slap them on. But if you have to pay points for them, I wouldn't with the Hellhound. The reason for this is we are trying to keep the Hellhound cheap and cheerful and nicely combat efficient. Now, this may surprise some of you, but I'm not going to do a deep dive on the Hellhound loadouts. You need to identify what gap is in your list or what target you want the Hellhound to be hunting after. If you've got it in mind that it's going to be going after tanks, give it the melter cannon and the multi-melter, okay? If it's going to be going after infantry, give it the anti-infantry choices. You know what role you want this thing to perform. What I'm going to be doing is diving into the fundamentals of how to use this unit. And regardless of what target you choose to send this thing after, getting these fundamentals right is vitally important, because if you don't understand the fundamentals, then you won't be able to get the most out of this unit and you won't be fully utilizing it. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the most common mistakes that I see people making with this unit. Starting off, let's take a look at why so many players see the Hellhound as a quirky little bomb truck first and a unit second. Now, the Hellhound has always had this quirky little ability. No matter what edition it's been in, it's always had this thing where it explodes easier. And in the 9th edition book, when your Hellhound is destroyed, when you roll the dice to see if it explodes, rather than it just blowing up on a 6, it actually blows up on a 5 or 6, giving it a 33% chance to detonate and do D3 mortal wounds to all units within 6 inches of it. For some reason, when Guard players see this, a strange fancy comes over them, and they decide that the best way to use a Hellhound is to just yeet it forward, just absolutely Zerg rush it into the enemy lines as quickly as possible, even charging it in and then trying to get it killed so it might blow up and do D3 mortal wounds to everything around it, do an average of 2 mortal wounds to a handful of enemy units. The problem is, whilst it's very cool having a Hellhound going in and blowing up a huge fireball, the reality is it's a terrible use of the unit, and it's such a waste of points because it's essentially the equivalent of trying to get a smite off on 2 or 3 enemy units. That's literally it. And it would you, let me ask you this question, would you ever spend 110 points on a Psyker that might get to smite once in a game, but it only goes off 33% of the time, and if it fails to get that smite off, it's useless for the rest of the game? Would you buy that Psyker? No, of course you wouldn't. It's terrible. So why do you think of the Hellhound in this capacity? It's a really, I don't know why Guard players always do this, but I guess it's just the idea of it. Charging forward and exploding sounds kind of cool, and on paper you think, oh no, do 3 more wounds, yeah, I can get loads of enemy units with that. The reality is that more often than not, you're going to fly your Hellhound into the enemy unit, it's going to die, not explode, and you're going to be like, oh, that was a massive waste of time. Why did I just waste my unit doing that? And digging a bit deeper into this concept, some players get around this idea of, oh, well, it might only happen 33% of the time by taking 3 Hellhounds, and they stick them all on the front lines. And they're like, these guys are going to go forward, and statistically, if they all die turn 1, then one of them will explode, and haha, that's like guaranteed mortal wounds to the enemy. And again, I'm just there thinking to myself, why the hell would you take 3 Hellhounds and spend 330 points on those units on the chance that one of them might explode and do a handful of mortal wounds, when instead, for 330 points, you could take 2 Leman Russes with battle cannons or plasma cannons, las cannons, and heavy bolters on the side. And those Leman Russes are going to be pounding into the enemy turn after probably 4 turns or 3 or 4 turns over the course of the game. Why wouldn't you take those Leman Russes instead? So over-investigating Hellhounds to try and get the bombs off or to try and make them do some damage on the battlefield really isn't the way of doing it. And even though they're short range, putting them front and center isn't worthwhile either, because they're not very durable. So they're just going to get picked up in relatively short order by your enemy's anti-tank units. Rather than thinking of the Hellhound as this smooth-brained, short-range meme unit that you can just throw at the enemy and not care if it dies, instead, start getting your wrinkly brain out and having a good old think about how you can play cleverly with this unit. Because if you're just going to use it as a direct damage dealer, you might as well just take its equivalent points and Leman Russes. We've covered that. You need to be using this vehicle in another way, a way that is going to separate it from the rest of the units in your motor pool. And what you want to be doing is engaging in lone wolf flank attacks. You can do this by either deploying it turn 1 on the flank of your deployment zone or putting it into strategic reserve. Ask yourself, do you need this unit turn 1? Probably not. It's probably not going to do much if you have it just in the middle of your army turn 1, apart from just die. But it might be able to make things happen turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. Because what you want to be going after with this unit, how you want to be getting the most out of it, it's not throwing it into the main brawl in the middle of the board. You don't want to be doing that. Leave that to the infantry. Leave that to the Leman Russes. The units that have either got the numbers or the durability on their side. What your Hellhound wants to be doing is sneaking down a flank. Literally, you could put this on the very edge of the map and just send it down a flank, terrain willing. And it might take your Hellhound till turn 3 or turn 4 to get to its destination. But when it gets there, it's going to have a big impact. Because what we're hunting after with this thing is isolated, lonely objective holders. Those little 5-man squads that your opponent puts on his home objective. Or if it's like a 6 objective game, he puts it out far on the left or right flank. Just a little 5-man squad that he doesn't really want you to be thinking about, that he doesn't want you to be paying any attention to, that can just sit there scoring him loads of points whilst you're distracted by the main big fight in the middle of the board. And the reason why going after these 5-man squads is so important is because primarily it's going to mess with your opponent's way of scoring points, and secondarily it's going to really mess up his game plan. Because your opponent wants to just be able to have a few units here and there scoring in points, whilst his main damage dealers, his Death Star, goes around the battlefield just slapping everyone. Okay, that's what he wants to do. And if you've got this cheeky little Hellhound going down the flank, your opponent has got a bit of a tricky situation. Because either he has to let the Hellhound do what it's going to do, or he doesn't understand what the mission of the Hellhound is, and then it catches him unaware. Either way, it's going to start taking away primary points from him. Or your opponent goes, oh, I can see what that cheeky little bugger's going to do. He's coming after my little squad of 5-man system, that objective. Right, better put a unit of Retributor multi-melters into him. And you're like, okay, well, for every piece of anti-tank that you're putting into my innocent little Hellhound, is a piece of anti-tank that's not going into my Leman Russes. And every unit that you redirect to either reinforce that flank objective or to take it back after the Hellhound has burnt everything to a crisp is a unit you're not pushing into the main central brawl, into the big fight that often happens in 40k games in the middle of the board. And that means that either my Leman Russes are going to be more durable indirectly, or I'm going to start winning that central fight. One way or another, I'm happy with that situation. Some people are going to be asking what makes the Hellhound ideally suited for this role. Why wouldn't I use other units like Rough Riders or Leman Russes to achieve the same thing? Great questions. The reason I like using the Hellhound for it is, firstly, it's actually pretty quick in comparison to, let's say, a Leman Russ. The Hellhound has got a 12-inch move, the Leman Russ has got a 10-inch move. The Hellhound is on a much more slender frame, especially when you take into account the Leman Russ's sponsons. And this means that on terrain-heavy boards, like you will find at most tournaments, there will be gaps that the Hellhound can squeeze through that, frankly, your Leman Russ with its sponsons just can't get through. So the Hellhound is a bit faster and a bit more maneuverable. Also, the Hellhound doesn't really mind moving and advancing because it's not bringing a huge amount of firepower to the table, so missing out on its guns for a turn isn't the end of the world. But the Leman Russ, you don't want a Leman Russ not to be firing for a turn, right? So it doesn't really want to move and advance. So overall, the Hellhound is just much faster than many other vehicles in your motor pool. I hinted at this before, but the Hellhound is actually pretty cheap as well. It's only 110 points. It's not a massive investment, so if it doesn't manage to achieve its mission, if the opponent ends up intercepting it because he sees what's coming and blows it up, or it just happens to get targeted and it dies, you've not lost something that's so fundamental to your game plan that you're going to just lose the game and fall apart. No, it's nice the Hellhound gets to his target. It can mess with the opponent. It's a great tool to have in your toolbox. But if it doesn't go off, it doesn't go off, and you've not lost a huge amount in the effort. And the third reason, which is probably the most important, is that it's a low priority unit. If your opponent sees a Leman Russ, he's like, right, I know what that does. It's a big tank with lots of guns. I need to kill it. But when your opponent sees a Hellhound, instinctively, he's going to be like, well, this doesn't seem as scary as a Leman Russ. It's not going to be as high priority in what I need to kill. Yeah, it's pretty short range as well, so I probably don't need to worry about it for a turn or two. It's not the end of the world. Oh, it's doing a bit of a flanking maneuver? Meh, not really that bothered. I've got bigger things to be dealing with in the middle of the board. And it's because of this, what I would argue, false perception of the Hellhound not being a good unit, that more often than not, it's going to get to its destination relatively unmolested. It might have drawn a bit of fire on the way, but not that much. Just some spare stuff your opponent had hanging around, right? And by the time your opponent realizes their mistake and realizes, oh, this is what he was going after with this thing, it's often too late and the Hellhound's already burning. But that's just how I like to use my Hellhounds. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, then make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you found today's video particularly helpful, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. By becoming a supporter, you will gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord, an online community with almost 1,000 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We're always talking about tactics, army lists, hobbying, painting, and we've even got a pretty spicy meme section too. And I'd like to say a thank you to all of the latest channel members. So a big thank you to Will Ward, Jace Liebman, Jeremy Klein, Quivery Gore, Skage Wrecked, Resident Metal Wargaming, Adam, Alias 2002, Dan the Man, High Marshal Balin, and Loyal Cav. Thank you guys for doing your part. I'm also going to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a big thank you to 3B-Fly, Mr. MC Nuggets 22, Hawk EXE 3M6, Zacharia, Samuel Ball Brew, and Dylan Mosley. Thank you guys for becoming Patreon supporters. And last but certainly not least, I would like to say a personal heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and August Varney. Thank you guys for your generous support. It is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.